3,000 candles blazed from chandeliers of twisted iron and bone, casting their flickering light across a sea of faces that stretched to the far walls of Valindra's great hall. Aelith pressed her back against the cold marble of the western pillar, her fingers trembling where they gripped the stone. She should not have come. Every whisper of instinct begged her to flee, to return to the servants' passage and disappear before anyone noticed the healer woman hiding among the shadows of nobility. But she had to see. The air hummed with anticipation, thick with the scent of winter roses and barely contained power. Pack leaders, noble houses, and common wolves who had traveled from the farthest reaches of the kingdom filled every inch of available space. The choosing. On the raised dais at the far end of the hall stood Kale, Alpha King of Valindra, and the sight of him stole the breath from her lungs as it always did. His shoulders were rigid beneath the ceremonial black and silver, his jaw set like carved granite. Dark hair fell across his brow, and even from this distance, she could see the way his hands remained perfectly still at his sides. Those hands. She knew them so well. Knew how they trembled when they cradled her face in the darkness. Knew the calluses on his palms, earned from years of wielding sword and shield. Knew the way his fingers had threaded through her hair the night he first called her his heart. 6 months of stolen moments, 6 months of secret meetings in the moonlit gardens where no one thought to look for a king. 6 months of whispered promises and desperate touches, and a love that had bloomed in the most impossible soil. And it had begun with a song. She had been assigned to the night rotation in the royal nursery, a position no other servant wanted. The young prince, Emrys, had been born without the ability to hear, a devastating blow that had killed his mother in the birthing, as if the grief of bringing a silent child into the world had been too much for her heart to bear. Kale had never taken another queen after that loss, raising his son alone while healers and herbalists and practitioners of the old magic tried everything to reach the boy who lived in silence. Nothing had worked. But Aelith had noticed something the others missed, the way the child's fingers stilled when she moved past his cradle, the way his small body seemed to orient toward vibration, toward resonance, toward something his ears could not provide. So she had sung, not for his ears, but for his bones, for the deep frequencies that traveled through wood and stone and flesh. She had pressed her palm against his chest and let her voice pour into him, a lullaby woven from the old tongue. Melodies that her grandmother had taught her were never meant for human hearing alone. And the deaf prince had turned his head toward her. It had taken weeks, then months. Each night she sang, and each night Emrys responded a little more. He began to reach for her when she entered the room. His eyes, those solemn amber eyes so like his father's, would track her movement with something that looked almost like hope. The king had discovered them by accident. Aelith still remembered the terror that had flooded through her when she turned to find Kale standing in the doorway, his face unreadable in the dim candlelight. She had expected fury, punishment, exile for daring to touch the royal air without permission. Instead, he had crossed the room in silence, knelt beside his son's bed, and watched as Emrys reached for her hand with a smile that none of the nurses had ever witnessed. When Kyle finally looked at her, there were tears on his face. That was the night everything changed. The night he began seeking her out in secret. The night their souls recognized each other for what they were. Mates. Aelith's hand moved to her hip, where the fabric of her dress concealed the mark he had given her 3 months ago. A claiming bite, pressed into her flesh on the night of the winter solstice, when he had sworn before the old gods that she belonged to him and he to her. The council demands a political alliance, he had murmured against her skin, his breath warm where his teeth had just broken her flesh. But you are my true mate. When spring comes, I will announce you to the kingdom. You will be my queen, Aelith. Nothing in this world or any other will change that. She had believed him. Her other hand moved to her lower belly, where a different secret grew. A secret she had discovered only a week ago, a secret she had been waiting to share until after this ceremony, when he came to her, as he always did. "The candidates will now approach," the High Elder announced, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Aelith's nails dug crescents into her palms as 5 women in gowns of purest white ascended the dais steps. Daughters of ancient bloodlines, each one groomed from birth for this possibility, each one representing treaties and alliances that could shape the kingdom for generations. And at their center, with hair like burnished copper and eyes the color of a winter sea, walked Revessa of House Valanthos. The crowd hummed with approval. The Valanthos controlled the southern territories, commanded 4,000 warriors, and had been maneuvering their daughter toward the throne since the day she learned to walk. Aelith searched Kael's face for any sign of the man she knew, any flicker of warmth, any silent acknowledgement that this ceremony was nothing but performance, a necessary ritual, before he could claim his true mate publicly. His expression held nothing at all. Something cold began to unfurl in Aelith's chest. "Kael, Alpha King of Valindra, blood of the first wolves," the High Elder intoned. "You have heard the counsel of your advisors. You have reviewed the treaties and alliances. The realm awaits your choice." Silence stretched across the hall like a blade waiting to fall. Aelith stopped breathing. The mark on her hip burned with sudden intensity, pulsing in rhythm with her racing heart. She pressed her hand against it, willing him to feel her through their bond, willing him to turn his head, to find her in the crowd, to declare that his choice had already been made in secret gardens under silver moonlight. Kael stepped forward. His movement was wrong, mechanical. His gait lacked the fluid grace she had memorized through countless stolen moments. And his eyes, those amber eyes that blazed with fierce love when he looked at her, seemed flat, hollow, as if something had reached inside him and scooped out everything that made him Kael. "I choose." His voice rang out, empty as an abandoned tomb. "Revessa of House Valanthos." The hall exploded. Cheers shook the ancient stones. Nobles embraced. Warriors howled their approval as an alliance that would strengthen the kingdom's borders for generations was sealed with 2 simple words. And Aelith felt her world shatter into 1,000 pieces. The mark on her hip flared with searing, blinding pain. She gasped, doubling over as agony radiated through her body, her hand flying to the place where his teeth had once claimed her flesh. It burned as if the bite itself was being torn from her skin. Through tear-blurred vision, she watched Kael take Revessa's hand, watched him raise it to his lips in the traditional gesture of acceptance. Watched the woman's mouth curve into a triumphant smile while the man Aelith loved showed nothing at all. He did not search the crowd. He did not hesitate. He did not seem to remember that she existed. A sound escaped Aelith's throat, something between a sob and a keen of animal grief. She stumbled backward, desperate to escape before the pain crushed her completely. The servants' corridors were empty, everyone having gone to witness the ceremony. Aelith ran through them blind, one hand pressed to her burning mark, the other wrapped protectively around her belly. His child, growing inside her while he chose another. She would not stay to watch him wed Revessa. Would not remain in the castle where she had sung lullabies to his son, where she had given him her heart, where she had been fool enough to believe that a nobody with a gift for song could ever truly hold the love of a king. Her chamber was small and sparse, holding only what she could carry. A few dresses, her mother's ring, the dried herbs she had gathered for the nausea that had plagued her mornings. She paused at the window, looking out at the celebration bonfires being lit across the capital. Somewhere in that great hall, Kael was accepting congratulations for his wise choice. Revessa was probably already planning the wedding feast, and no one knew that the Alpha King's true mate was fleeing into the darkness with his heir growing in her womb. Aelith pressed her palm flat against the frosted glass. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered. "May you find whatever happiness you chose over me." Then she pulled her cloak tight around her shoulders and slipped through the servants' gate, vanishing into the bitter winter night. She did not see the shadow watching from the tower above. She did not see the amber eyes that flickered with sudden, desperate awareness, as if something was clawing its way up from a great depth. She did not hear the howl that tore through the sky moments later, a sound so raw and broken that wolves across the kingdom lifted their heads in shared anguish. And she did not hear the small voice that called out from the royal nursery, a single sound that had never passed those lips before. The deaf prince, who had never spoken a word in his 3 years of life, crying out a sound that was not quite her name. Reaching toward the window. Reaching toward something that was already gone. By the time Kale burst into her empty chamber, his eyes wild with confusion and his body shaking, Aelith had already disappeared into the forest. And in the nursery, Emrys fell silent once more. 3 months later, the village of Fernhollow had almost forgotten it had a newcomer. Aelith had arrived in the depths of winter, a young widow fleeing grief, she claimed. The village elders had taken one look at her swollen belly and her haunted eyes and offered her the abandoned cottage at the edge of the pine forest. In exchange for her healing skills, they would ask no questions about her past. She had accepted before they finished speaking. Now spring was struggling to break through the last stubborn snows, and Aelith had become simply the healer woman who lived where the trees grew thick. She delivered babies. She set broken bones. She brewed teas for fevers and made poultices for wounds that would not close. And every night, when the village slept and the moon rose silver over the pines, she pressed her hands to her growing belly and sang. The same lullabies she had sung to Emrys. The same deep frequencies that traveled through bone and blood. Her children, and she was certain now that there were 2 of them, seemed to respond to her voice in ways that made her heart ache with memory. They kicked when she sang. They settled when she hummed. They moved in patterns that suggested they could feel the vibrations even from within her womb. Like father, like children, she thought bitterly. Except their father had thrown her away without a second glance. The mark on her hip refused to fade. Aelith had examined it countless times, watching in growing confusion as the scar tissue darkened rather than disappeared. A rejected mate bond should dissolve within weeks. The mark should smooth over, leaving nothing but bare skin and bitter memories. Instead, it burned. It burned when the wind blew from the east. It burned when she dreamed of amber eyes and whispered promises. It burned in the deep hours of the night, pulsing with a heat that kept her from sleeping. And sometimes, in those dark hours, she could swear she felt something through it. A presence, a searching, a desperate clawing need that pressed against the edges of her consciousness like a wolf, howling at a door that would not open. But that was impossible. Kale had chosen another. Their bond should have severed the moment he spoke Revessa's name, unless the bond had never truly broken at all. Aelith shoved the thought away. False hope was a poison more dangerous than any herb in her collection. Mistress Yarrow? The voice at her door belonged to young Brecken, the tanner's boy, using the false name Aelith had given when she arrived. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. "What is it?" Brecken's freckled face was pale with excitement. "Traders have come from the capital. They bring news from Valindra." Aelith's heart stopped beating. "What news?" "The Alpha King," Brecken breathed. "They say he has gone mad." The world tilted beneath her feet. She gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. "Mad?" she managed. Brecken nodded eagerly, oblivious to her distress. "The traders say he has torn apart half the kingdom searching for someone, a woman. They say he has not slept since the winter solstice. His wolves comb every village, every forest, and every road." Aelith's hand moved to her belly. Both children kicked sharply, as if responding to the mention of their father. "And there is more," Brecken continued. "The young prince, the deaf one. They say he has stopped eating, stopped responding to anyone. They say he sits at the nursery window all day and all night, waiting for something that never comes." The words struck Aelith like a physical blow. Emrys, her sweet, silent boy who had learned to smile when she sang, who had reached for her hand in the darkness, who had finally begun to emerge from the prison of his silence. "They say the king has offered 20,000 gold pieces for any information about this woman," Brecken added. "No one knows who she is, only that the king will destroy anything that stands between him and finding her. 20,000 gold. A fortune beyond imagination. The affairs of kings are not our concern," Aelith heard herself say. "Thank your father for the news." But after Brecken had gone, she sank into her chair with legs that would not hold her. He was searching for her. Why would Chaol search for a woman he had publicly rejected? Why would he tear his kingdom apart for a lover he had discarded? Why would his son, who had barely known her, waste away at a window waiting for her return? Unless something had been wrong that night. Unless the emptiness in his eyes had been something other than indifference. Unless... Movement at the tree line shattered her thoughts. Aelith's breath caught. A shape stood between the ancient pines. Large, four-legged, dark gray fur catching the last light of day. A wolf. As she watched, frozen in place, another emerged beside it. Then another. Then two more. 5 massive wolves, their eyes fixed on her cottage with an intelligence that was anything but animal. Her mark exploded with sudden, searing heat. Aelith gasped, stumbling away from the window as pain radiated through her body. This was nothing like the dull burn she had grown accustomed to. This was fire. This was molten iron pressed against her flesh. And beneath the pain, she felt something else. A presence, vast and desperate, pushing against the edges of her mind. He was close. Not just his wolves. Him. Aelith's eyes darted around her small cottage, calculating escape routes she already knew would fail. The back door opened onto the forest, but if wolves were watching, they would run her down before she made it 50 yards. The root cellar was hidden beneath the floorboards, but a wolf's nose would find her within minutes. She was trapped. A heavy knock shook her front door. The wolves she had seen were in their animal forms. They could not knock. Which meant someone in human shape stood on her threshold. Another knock, more insistent. "Mistress Yarrow?" A male voice, deep and unfamiliar. "Please open the door. I swear on my blood that we mean you no harm." Aelith laughed bitterly at that. Wolves who had hunted a pregnant woman through 3 months of winter meant her no harm. How comforting. But there was no point in hiding. Running was impossible. If she did not open the door willingly, they would simply break it down. She grabbed the iron poker from beside her hearth and moved toward the entrance. When she opened it, 3 men stood before her. 2 were clearly warriors, their massive frames and alert postures marking them as the Alpha King's elite guard. But it was the 3rd man who drew her attention. He was older than the others, his dark hair threaded with silver, his face carved with lines that spoke of decades of service and sorrow. His eyes were deep amber, and when they fell on her swollen belly, something like relief flooded across his weathered features. "My lady," he said, and the title made Aelith flinch. "I am Tiernan, first beta to the Alpha King. We have been searching for you for a very long time." "You are mistaken," Aelith said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "My name is Yarrow. I am a simple healer. I know nothing of kings." Tiernan's expression shifted to something that looked almost like pity. "You are Aelith, daughter of no house, formerly a servant in the royal castle. You were assigned to the nursery of Prince Emrys. You carry the king's claiming mark on your left hip and his children in your womb." The poker trembled in her grip. How do you know about the mark? Because the king has described it to every wolf in the realm, because he has not slept more than an hour at a time since the night of the choosing, because he has burned through healers, seers, and trackers by the dozen, all in desperate pursuit of the mate who vanished without a trace. Tiernan paused, his voice softening. And because Prince Emrys has not responded to a single soul since you left, he will not eat. He will not sleep. He sits at the nursery window and reaches toward the darkness, waiting for you to return. Aelith's knees nearly buckled. Emrys, she whispered. He spoke, my lady, the night you disappeared. For the first time in his life, he made a sound, a word that was almost your name. Tiernan's eyes glistened. None of us knew he was capable of it, and none of us have been able to coax another sound from him since. The grief hit Aelith like a wave, threatening to drag her under. Her sweet boy, her silent prince. He had spoken for her, and she had not been there to hear it. May we come in? Tiernan asked quietly. She should refuse. Every instinct screamed that she should slam the door and flee through the back, wolves or no wolves. But her legs were shaking, her mark was burning, and the babies had finally stilled, as if they too were listening. She stepped aside. Tiernan entered alone, leaving the guards at the threshold. He looked around her modest cottage, taking in the drying herbs, the simple furniture, the narrow bed where she had spent countless nights crying into her pillow. When he turned back to face her, his expression was grave. He did not choose her, Tiernan said. Revessa, I mean. He did not choose her willingly. Aelith's heart stopped. What? The night of the choosing, someone slipped a compound into the king's wine, a mixture of wolfsbane and other herbs we still cannot identify. It suppressed his wolf entirely, severed his connection to his instincts, to his bond. Tiernan's jaw tightened. To you. That is impossible, Aelith breathed. We thought so too, until the effects wore off 3 days later and the king woke screaming your name. The beta's voice hardened with old anger. He remembered nothing of the ceremony, nothing of choosing Revessa. The first thing he did was run to find you, and when your chamber was empty, he did not need to finish. Aelith sank into the nearest chair, her mind reeling. Drugged. He had been drugged. The empty eyes, the mechanical movements, the complete absence of recognition. It had not been rejection. It had been violation. Who did this? She demanded. House Valanthos. We are certain of it now, though we could not prove it at first. They have wanted their bloodline on the throne for 3 generations. With you gone and the king bound to their daughter by witnessed oath, they would have everything they desired. But you said he woke, that he remembered nothing. Surely he could annul. A witness choosing cannot be undone by the king's word alone. The council must agree. And the council has been infiltrated by Valanthos' allies. Tiernan leaned forward. My lady, you must understand. Kael has been fighting a war on 2 fronts. He battles the political machinations of House Valanthos while simultaneously tearing apart the kingdom to find you. His wolf has been at war with his human mind since the moment he regained consciousness. If he does not find you soon, he will go feral, Aelith finished, horror blooming in her chest. An alpha wolf separated from his true mate for too long could lose himself entirely to the beast within. And an alpha of Kael's power, driven mad by a severed bond, would become something monstrous. I cannot go back, she heard herself say. Revessa, the Valanthos, they will kill me. They will kill my children. Which is precisely why I have not told the king exactly where you are. Tiernan reached into his coat and withdrew a folded letter. This was intercepted 3 weeks ago by one of our spies within House Valanthos. Aelith took the paper with numb fingers. The seal was broken, but she could still see the serpent crest of House Valanthos pressed into dark wax. The message was brief. The healer woman has been located in the northern territories. The problem will be eliminated before the full moon rises. Our queen's position must be secured. Long live the Valanthos bloodline. Ice flooded her veins. Assassins, she breathed. Already dispatched, Tiernan confirmed grimly. We intercepted this by chance. We do not know how many have been sent, or how close they are. His eyes found hers with urgent intensity. My lady, Kale will find you with or without my help. The bond is guiding him. Every day, he draws closer. But if the Valanthos assassins reach you first. A howl split the evening air. Tiernan was on his feet instantly, his body tensing. That is not one of ours. Through her window, Aelith could see shapes moving at the edge of the forest. Not the same wolves who had watched her cottage earlier. These were different, sleeker. Their movements coordinated with predatory precision. And stepping from the shadows behind them, a figure in dark leather raised a crossbow and aimed it directly at her window. Get down! Tiernan roared. The first arrow shattered the glass. Aelith hit the floor as glass exploded across her cottage. The arrow embedded itself in the wall behind where her head had been a heartbeat before, its tip glistening with something dark and wet. Poison. They were not trying to wound her. They were trying to end this quickly. Tiernan shifted mid-stride, his human form dissolving into a massive silver-gray wolf that launched itself through the shattered window. His two guards followed, their bodies twisting through the transformation as they crashed into the darkness beyond. Sounds of battle erupted outside. Snarls, the clash of steel against claw, a yelp of pain that was cut short. Aelith pressed herself against the floor, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly. The babies were moving frantically, responding to her terror with kicks and shifts that seemed to come from every direction at once. Another arrow punched through the wooden wall, burying itself in the floorboards inches from her hand. She could not stay here. Aelith crawled toward the back of the cottage, toward the door that led to the root cellar. It was not much of a hiding place, but it was below ground, harder to shoot through. She had almost reached it when the front door exploded inward. A figure stepped through the wreckage, lean and lethal, dressed in dark leather that seemed to drink the fading light. A woman, Aelith realized, young, with sharp features and cold gray eyes that swept the room with professional efficiency. When those eyes found Aelith crouched on the floor, the woman smiled. The king's whore, she said, her voice carrying the cultured accent of southern nobility. House Valanthos sends its regards. She raised a curved blade that gleamed with the same dark coating as the arrows. Aelith's hand closed around the iron poker she had dropped. It was a pitiful weapon against a trained assassin, but it was all she had. Stay back, she warned, her voice shaking. The woman laughed. Or what? You will poke me to death? She stepped closer, blade held with casual expertise. I was hoping you would run. The hunt is always more satisfying when the prey believes it has a chance. Through the broken window, Aelith could hear the battle still raging. Tiernan and his guards were fighting, but they were overwhelmed. She could hear it in the increasing desperation of their snarls, the growing frequency of pained yelps. No one was coming to save her. The assassin raised her blade, and Aelith did the only thing she could think to do. She opened her mouth and sang. It was not a lullaby this time, not the gentle, bone-deep frequencies she had used to reach Emrys through his silence. This was something older, something her grandmother had taught her never to use, had made her swear to keep buried. The death song. A frequency that did not soothe, a vibration that did not heal, a sound that shattered. The note that poured from Aelith's throat was barely audible to human ears, pitched at the very edge of perception. But it resonated through the cottage like a physical force, rattling the windows, vibrating the floorboards, humming in the iron poker still clutched in her hand. The assassin froze mid-step, her eyes widening with sudden confusion. The blade in her grip began to tremble. Aelith pushed harder, pouring everything she had into the song, her fear, her grief, her rage at the months of exile and heartbreak. her desperate primal need to protect the lives growing inside her. The assassin's blade cracked, then it shattered, fragments of poisoned steel scattering across the floor like dark snow. The woman stared at the empty hilt in her hand, her face twisting with disbelief. "What are you?" Aelith did not answer. She could not. The song was draining her, pulling from reserves she did not know she had. Her vision was darkening at the edges. Her body was shaking with exhaustion, but she did not stop. The frequency shifted, and the assassin screamed. It was not a battle cry. It was agony. The woman clapped her hands over her ears, but there was no blocking a sound that traveled through bone itself. She dropped to her knees, blood beginning to trickle from her nose. "Stop," she gasped. "Stop, please." The cottage door frame cracked. The iron chandelier above them groaned and twisted. Outside, wolves on both sides of the battle had frozen, their sensitive ears overwhelmed by a sound that should not exist. Aelith's voice faltered. The song died in her throat as her strength gave out completely. She collapsed against the wall, her vision swimming, her hands pressed to her belly where the babies had finally gone still. Too still. "No," she breathed, terror flooding through her exhaustion. "No, no, please." The assassin was recovering, pushing herself up from the floor with murder in her eyes. Blood still dripped from her nose, but her hand was reaching for a knife at her belt. "You will pay for that," she snarled. "I am going to gut you slowly. I am going to make you watch while I cut those abominations from your—" The wall behind her exploded. Something massive crashed through the timber and stone, something darker than shadow and vast as a nightmare. The assassin spun, knife raised, but she never had a chance. Jaws the size of her torso closed around her body. Aelith watched, too drained to move, as the enormous wolf shook the assassin like a rag doll. The sound of snapping bones filled the cottage. Then the wolf flung the broken body aside and turned in a circle, searching for more threats. Finding none, those blazing golden eyes fixed on her. He was the largest wolf she had ever seen. His fur was pure black, absorbing the candlelight like a void given form. Power radiated from him in waves that pressed against her skin like physical weight. And his eyes. Those amber eyes that she had dreamed of every night for 3 months, now burning gold as his wolf rose to the surface. Eyes that had been empty and hollow the last time she saw them, but now blazed with an intensity that stole what remained of her breath. The wolf approached her slowly. Aelith knew she should be afraid. This was not the man she remembered. This was the beast beneath, barely contained, driven half-mad by months of separation from his mate. But when he finally stood before her, when he lowered his massive head and pressed his nose gently to her swollen belly, she felt no fear at all. Only recognition. The babies kicked, both of them at once, responding to their father's presence with movements so strong she gasped. The wolf made a sound that was almost a whimper. Then the shift began. It happened between one breath and the next. One moment, a beast stood before her. The next, a man knelt in the wreckage of her cottage, his hands hovering over her stomach as if he was afraid to touch her. Kale looked up, and the Alpha King of Valindra was weeping. "You are alive," he breathed, his voice shattered and raw. "Aelith, you are alive, and you are—" His eyes dropped to her belly. His hand reached toward it, trembling, then stopped. "May I?" he whispered. The question broke something inside her. The most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms, kneeling before her in the blood and debris of a battle he had won, asking permission to touch his own children. Aelith took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. The babies kicked again, both of them reaching toward their father's warmth. And Kale, Alpha King of Valindra, dropped his head and sobbed. Aelith had imagined this moment countless times during her months of exile. She had imagined fury, cold indifference. the king dragging her back to Valindra in chains to face punishment for fleeing without his permission. She had never imagined him broken at her feet, weeping with relief, his whole body shaking as he felt his children move beneath his palm. But imagination had been kind compared to reality, because reality included 3 months of grief. 3 months of believing she had been thrown away like refuse. 3 months of carrying his heirs alone while her heart rotted in her chest. She pulled away from his touch. Cale's head snapped up, his tear-streaked face shifting from relief to confusion. Aelith? Do not. Her voice came out harder than she intended. Do not touch me as if you have the right. I have every right. You are my mate. I am the woman you rejected before 3,000 witnesses. The words tasted like ash, but she forced them out. I am the woman who stood in the shadows and watched you choose another. I am the woman who fled into the winter with your children in my belly because I believed, because I had every reason to believe, that you had thrown me away. Cale flinched as if she had struck him. I did not choose her. Aelith, please, you must believe me. I was drugged. The Valantos poisoned me. I remember nothing of that night except waking 3 days later with my wolf howling and your scent fading from my chambers. How convenient. Convenient? His voice rose, cracking with emotion. You think any part of this has been convenient? I have spent 3 months tearing my kingdom apart to find you. 3 months fighting my own counsel, my own advisors, my own wolf for control. 3 months watching my son waste away at a window, waiting for the woman who taught him that the world was worth engaging with. Emrys. The name hit her like a blow. He stopped eating. Cale continued, his voice breaking. He stopped responding. The light you brought to his eyes, the progress you made with him, and it all vanished the night you disappeared. He sits in that nursery, day and night, reaching toward the darkness. And nothing I do, nothing anyone does, can bring him back. That is not fair, Aelith whispered. You cannot use your son to— I am not using him. Cale rose to his feet, and even in his grief, he towered over her. I am telling you the truth, the whole truth. Not just about what was done to me, but about what your absence has cost everyone who loves you. Everyone who loves me? She laughed, and the sound was bitter enough to curdle milk. You chose another woman, Cale, in front of your entire kingdom. Whatever was done to you, I had no way of knowing. All I knew was that the man who swore I was his mate, who bit me, who claimed me, who promised me a throne, that man stood before his people and declared that someone else would be his queen. Her voice cracked. She hated the weakness, but she could not stop it. Do you know what that felt like? To watch you take her hand? To watch you kiss her knuckles while I hid in the shadows like a dirty secret? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was going to tell you about the babies that night. I had practiced the words. I was going to wait for you to come to me after the ceremony, and I was going to place your hand on my belly and watch your face when you realized. She could not continue. Kyle reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. 3 months, she choked out. I have spent 3 months believing I was worthless, that everything you said was a lie, that I was just a convenient distraction, a warm body to fill your bed until you were forced to choose someone worthy of your crown. You are worthy of everything, Cale said fiercely. You are my true mate. The bond recognized you before I even knew your name. The first time I saw you in that nursery, singing to my son, something inside me knew. Something that went deeper than thought, deeper than reason. Then why did I have to hide? The question burst from her before she could stop it. If I was your true mate, why did we meet in secret? Why did I spend 6 months sneaking through servants' passages and lying to everyone around me? Kyle's face contorted with anguish. Because I was trying to protect you. The council would never have accepted a servant as queen without preparation. The noble houses would have seen you as a threat. I needed time to lay the groundwork, to build alliances, to ensure that when you announced me, I would be safe. Aelith finished the sentence with hollow understanding. Instead, your caution gave your enemies the time they needed to destroy us both. The words hung between them like a blade. Kale's shoulders slumped. The Alpha King, who had never bowed to anyone, looked utterly defeated. Yes, he said quietly. My caution nearly cost me everything. You, our children, my sanity. He met her eyes, and she saw no pride left in them, only raw, bleeding honesty. I failed you, Aelith, not by choosing Revessa, that choice was never mine, but by not declaring you sooner, by not trusting that our bond could withstand any political storm, by hiding the most precious thing in my life, as if I was ashamed of it. He dropped to his knees before her again. I cannot undo what was done. I cannot erase 3 months of grief. But I am here now, on my knees, begging you to give me the chance to prove that I am worthy of you, that I will spend every day of my life making amends for the pain you have suffered. Aelith stared down at him, her heart at war with itself. She wanted to forgive him. Gods, she wanted to fall into his arms and let the bond between them wash away all the hurt. She could feel it even now, that golden thread connecting her soul to his, pulsing with warmth and desperate need. But trust, once shattered, could not be rebuilt with words alone. I do not know if I can, she whispered. I do not know if there is enough left of my heart to try. Kale's face crumpled. But he did not argue, did not demand. He simply knelt before her, accepting her uncertainty as his due. It was Tiernan's voice that broke the silence. My king. The beta stood in the ruined doorway, his human form battered and bloody but his eyes alert. We have secured the area, but there may be more assassins. We cannot remain here. Kale rose slowly, his eyes never leaving Aelith's face. She comes with us. Whatever she decides about our bond, she is not safe here. Aelith wanted to argue, but she could still feel the echo of that death song in her bones, could still see the shattered blade on the floor. The Valanthos had found her once. They would find her again. And next time, she might not have the strength to fight them off. Emrys, she heard herself say. I want to see Emrys. Something fierce and hopeful flickered in Kale's eyes. He has been waiting for you. Every day for 3 months he has been waiting. Then take me to him. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. But it was a beginning. The journey to Valindra should have taken 3 days. Kale's wolves made it in 1. They traveled through the night, a company of shadows flowing through moonlit forests and across frozen rivers. Aelith rode before the Alpha King on his warhorse, his arm wrapped securely around her waist, his body blocking the bitter wind. She had protested at first, had insisted she could ride her own mount, but Kale had simply lifted her onto his saddle and silenced her objections with a look that was equal parts command and plea. My wolf needs you close, he had said, his voice rough. 3 months of separation nearly destroyed us both. Please, grant me this much. So she had relented, leaning back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong against her spine. The babies seemed to approve of the arrangement. They had settled into peaceful stillness, their movements calm and rhythmic for the first time in months. As the hours passed, Kyle talked. He told her about waking from the drugged haze to find Revessa in his chambers, her hands on his chest, her lips curved in triumph. About the horror that had flooded through him when he realized what had happened, about throwing her across the room with enough force to crack the wall, then running through the castle like a madman, screaming Aelith's name. He told her about the search, the wolves sent to every corner of the kingdom, the sleepless nights spent poring over maps and interrogating anyone who might have seen her, the way his wolf had clawed at his mind, howling with grief, demanding blood. I came close to killing Revessa 12 times, he admitted, his voice hollow. The only thing that stopped me was the knowledge that her death would give House Valanthos the excuse they needed to start a war. A war that would tear the kingdom apart and make it even harder to find you. So she still lives, Aelith said quietly. She lives. His arm tightened around her waist. But she has not set foot in my chambers since that night. She has not sat beside me at council. She may wear the title of Queen in Waiting, but every wolf in Valindra knows she is Queen of nothing. The council accepted this? The council had no choice. I made it clear that any advisor who pressed the issue would find themselves explaining their position to my wolf. A dark satisfaction colored his words. They learned quickly that some topics are not open for debate. Aelith fell silent, processing this. The Kale she had known, the man who had been so careful about politics and appearances, would never have threatened his own council. Would never have let his wolf so close to the surface. 3 months of searching had changed him, hardened him, stripped away the diplomatic restraint that had kept him from declaring her openly. She was not sure if that was a comfort or a warning. Tell me about Emrys, she said, changing the subject. Everything. I need to know what I am walking into. Kale's chest expanded with a heavy breath. After you left, he was inconsolable. The nurses said he screamed for hours. Screamed Aelith. Sounds that should have been impossible for him. By morning, he had gone silent again, but it was worse than before. He had retreated somewhere inside himself where none of us could reach. Aelith's throat tightened. And the progress we made? The responses to vibration? To touch? Gone. He flinches away from contact now. Covers his face when anyone tries to engage him. The only time he shows any awareness is when he is at the window. Kale's voice cracked. He reaches toward the east, Aelith, toward the direction you fled, as if some part of him knows you are out there and he is waiting for you to come home. Tears burned behind her eyes. Her sweet, silent boy. She had worked so hard to draw him out of his prison, and her leaving had locked the door behind her. I will reach him again, she said, and it was both a promise and a prayer. Whatever it takes, I will bring him back. Kale pressed his lips to her hair. I know you will. You are the only one who ever could. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of hoofbeats and the whisper of wind through pines filling the space between them. The bond pulsed gently, a thread of warmth connecting them even through the armor of Aelith's caution. She could feel his emotions bleeding through, his relief at having found her, his terror of losing her again, his desperate, aching love that had not dimmed despite 3 months of separation. And beneath it all, a guilt so vast it threatened to swallow him whole. He blamed himself for the drugging, for the choosing, for every day she had spent alone and afraid and believing herself worthless. He would carry that guilt forever, she realized. No matter what she said or did, he would never forgive himself for failing to protect her. The thought softened something in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something closer to understanding. As dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, the spires of Valindra emerged from the morning mist. The capital city spread before them, ancient and magnificent, its towers reaching toward the heavens. But something was wrong. Smoke rose from several quarters of the city. The distant sound of shouting reached their ears, and on the great banner that flew above the castle gates, the royal crest had been torn down. In its place flew the silver serpent of House Valanthos. No, Tiernan breathed from somewhere behind them. They would not dare. Kale's arm turned to iron around Aelith's waist, a growl built in his chest, so deep she felt it vibrate through her spine. They have taken the castle, he said, his voice deadly quiet. How? Aelith demanded. You were gone barely a day. Because they were waiting for this, waiting for me to leave, to take my best wolves with me. His eyes blazed with sudden gold as his wolf surged toward the surface. This was their plan all along. Draw me out. Take the throne while my back was turned. A rider burst from the city gates, galloping toward them at reckless speed. One of Kale's scouts, her face ashen with fear. My king, she gasped, reining her horse to a stop. The Valanthos struck at midnight. They had allies among the guard, more than we knew. Lord Valanthos has declared himself regent, claiming your obsession has rendered you unfit to rule. The growl in Kale's chest became a snarl. There is more. The scout's voice trembled. Lady Ravessa has been crowned queen. She has demanded that you surrender yourself for trial. If you refuse... If I refuse, what? The scout swallowed hard. If you refuse, she will execute the hostages. Everyone in the castle who remained loyal to you, the servants, the guards who would not bend the knee. Her eyes flickered to Aelith. And the prince. She says if you do not surrender by sunset, she will kill your son herself. The world went silent. Aelith felt Kale's body turn to stone behind her. Felt the bond between them flood with a rage so vast it stole her breath. Emrys. Her sweet, silent boy who had reached for her through 3 months of darkness, in the hands of the woman who had stolen everything. The battle for Valindra began at noon. Kale's wolves struck the outer walls like a thunderstorm made flesh, their fury magnified by 3 months of frustration and the primal need to protect their king's mate and heir. The Valanthos had fortified the gates, but they had not anticipated the sheer ferocity of wolves fighting for something far more precious than territory. Aelith watched from a protected position on the hillside, her hands pressed to her belly, her heart in her throat. Through the bond, she could feel Kale's rage like a living flame, burning through everything in its path. Within an hour, the outer walls had fallen. Within 2, the castle gates lay in splinters. But as the sun climbed toward the horizon, a messenger came running with news that turned her blood to ice. My lady. The young wolf's face was pale with terror. Lord Valanthos has barricaded himself in the great hall with the hostages. He says if the king does not surrender, he will begin executing them one by one. Aelith's nails bit into her palms. And Emrys? The messenger's voice cracked. The prince is with him. Lady Ravessa has a blade to his throat. The world narrowed to a single point of white-hot fury. She was moving before anyone could stop her, ignoring the shouts of the guards Kale had left to protect her. Her body ached from the journey, her back screaming with the weight of the twins, but none of that mattered. Emrys needed her. The castle corridors were chaos. Bodies of fallen wolves littered the stone floors. The scent of blood hung thick in the air. But Aelith pushed through it all, following the pull of something deeper than the mate bond, the invisible thread that had connected her to Kale's son since the first night she sang to him. She found Kale at the doors of the great hall, held back by Tiernan and 4 other wolves. You cannot go in there, Tiernan was saying. It is exactly what Valanthos wants. The moment you cross that threshold, my son is in there with a blade at his throat. Kyle's voice was barely human, his eyes blazing gold with barely restrained fury. Do you truly expect me to stand here and negotiate? I expect you to think, if you die, Valindra falls. If Valindra falls, everyone dies, including the prince, including your mate, including the children she carries. Kale's body shook with the effort of restraining his wolf. Aelith could feel the beast clawing at his mind, demanding blood, demanding vengeance. Kale. He spun at the sound of her voice, his eyes wild. Aelith, what are you doing here? I told you to stay. I know what you told me. She stopped before him, her chin raised. And I am telling you that I will not hide while your son dies. Our son, Kale corrected hoarsely. You are his mother in every way that matters. He has always been ours. The words struck her like a physical blow. She had never allowed herself to think of Emrys that way, had never dared to claim that kind of bond with the prince. But hearing Kale say it, seeing the truth of it in his eyes, Then let me save him, she said. Absolutely not. If you go in there, if I go in there, I give you the distraction you need. Aelith's voice was steady, even as her heart raced. Valanthos wants you, Kale. He wants to break you. But he does not know what I am. He does not know what I can do. She thought of the death song that had shattered the assassin's blade, the power that had erupted from her when her children were threatened. Let me go to them, she continued. Let me offer myself as a hostage in exchange for the others. While Valanthos is focused on his victory, you find another way in. You are asking me to let you walk into the hands of people who have been trying to kill you for months. I am asking you to trust me. Aelith reached up and pressed her palm against his cheek. You said you failed me by not trusting our bond to withstand the storm. This is your chance to prove you have learned. Trust me, Kale. Trust that I am strong enough to survive whatever comes. For a long, terrible moment, he simply stared at her. Then, slowly, he turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm. If anything happens to you, he said, his voice ragged, I will tear this world apart. I know. She managed a small smile. That is what I am counting on. Before her courage could fail, she turned and walked toward the great hall doors. Lord Valanthos, she called out. I am Aelith, the woman your family has been hunting. I am coming in alone. The massive doors creaked open, and Aelith stepped into the dragon's den. The great hall was a nightmare made real. 40 hostages knelt in rows before the raised dais, their hands bound, their faces streaked with tears. Armed Valanthos soldiers stood behind them with blades drawn, ready to begin the slaughter at a word. And on the throne that belonged to Kale sat Lord Aldrich Valanthos, his silver hair gleaming like a crown, his cold eyes surveying his domain with satisfaction. But Aelith barely noticed him. Her gaze was fixed on the small figure at Revessa's side. Emrys stood motionless, a jeweled dagger pressed against his pale throat. His amber eyes stared at nothing. His face held no expression at all. Until those eyes found her. Something flickered in their depths. A spark of recognition. A tiny flame in an ocean of darkness. His lips moved, forming a shape that might have been her name. So this is the creature that has caused such chaos, Revessa said, her voice dripping with contempt. A servant girl with a swollen belly, how utterly pathetic. Aelith ignored her. She could not tear her gaze from Emrys, from the way his small body had oriented toward her like a flower turning to the sun. I am here to offer an exchange, she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. Release the hostages. Release the prince. Take me instead. Valanthos leaned forward on the throne, interest sparking in his cold eyes. And why would I agree to such terms? I already have everything I need. Because I am what you truly want. Aelith placed her hand on her belly. The king's mate, the mother of his heirs. You kill me, and you break him completely. You hold me, and you control him forever. Revessa's eyes narrowed. Father, we should simply kill her now. She is too dangerous to— Silence. Valanthos raised a hand. The girl makes an interesting point. He studied Aelith with calculating precision. Very well, I accept. Guards, release the hostages, secure the woman. And the prince, Aelith pressed. He goes free as well. Something ugly flickered across Valanthos's face. The prince stays. Insurance against the king's temperament. It was not enough. But as the hostages were cut free and began stumbling toward the doors, Aelith knew it was all she was going to get. Rough hands grabbed her arms, dragging her toward the dais. She did not resist. She needed to be closer, needed to reach Emrys. Revessa watched her approach with barely concealed hatred. You should have stayed hidden, little healer. You should have disappeared into whatever hovel you crawled to and never looked back. And let you have everything you stole? Aelith shook her head. I think not. The dagger pressed harder against Emrys's throat. A thin line of red appeared on his pale skin. Aelith's world went white. Something vast and terrible surged up from her core, power she had never felt before. Power that had been sleeping in her blood her entire life. The babies responded instantly, their own nascent magic intertwining with hers, amplifying it beyond anything she could have imagined. She opened her mouth and sang. This was not the death song she had used against the assassin. This was something older, something primal, a frequency that resonated with the very bones of the earth that traveled through stone and steel and flesh with unstoppable force. The sound that poured from her throat was not entirely human. Every wolf in the hall dropped to their knees, hands clapping over their ears. The Valantho soldiers screamed as the frequency overwhelmed their sensitive hearing. Windows shattered, chandeliers swayed, cracks spread across the ancient stone walls. Revessa's dagger hand trembled violently. Then it went slack. The blade clattered to the floor. Emrys stumbled forward, freed from his captor's grip, and Aelith caught him in her arms. The moment she touched him, her song shifted, becoming something soft and warm and healing. The same frequencies she had used in the nursery, the vibrations that traveled through bone instead of air. The little prince pressed his face against her chest, his small body shaking with silent sobs. And then he spoke. Mama. A single word, barely more than a breath. But Aelith heard it. She felt it vibrate against her heart. Mama came back. Tears streamed down her face as she held him closer. Yes, my darling, Mama came back. And I am never leaving you again. The great hall doors exploded inward. Kale burst through in human form, his eyes blazing gold, his body radiating power that made the air itself tremble. Behind him flowed a tide of wolves, hundreds of them, their howls shaking the rafters. Lord Valanthos rose from the throne, his face contorted with fury. Guards! Kill them all! But there were no guards left standing. Aelith's song had shattered their will to fight. They lay curled on the floor, whimpering, their ears bleeding from the frequencies that no wolf was meant to endure. Only Revessa remained upright, her face twisted with hatred as she scrambled for the fallen dagger. Kale reached her before her fingers could close around the hilt. His hand wrapped around her throat, lifting her off the floor as if she weighed nothing. You threatened my mate, he said, his voice barely human. You held a blade to my son's throat. Give me one reason why I should not tear you apart where you stand. Revessa's face purpled. Her feet kicked uselessly in the air. Kale. Aelith's voice cut through his rage, not in front of Emrys. The Alpha King froze. His eyes flickered to his son, still pressed against Aelith's chest, still trembling from his ordeal. Slowly, deliberately, Kale lowered Revessa to the floor. You will face judgment before the assembled packs, he said, his voice cold as winter stone. You and your father both. And when that judgment falls, you will pray I had killed you quickly. He released her, and she crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. Then Kale crossed to where Aelith knelt with their son, and dropped to his knees beside them. He spoke, Aelith whispered, tears still flowing. Kale, he spoke to me. He called me. I heard. Kale's voice broke. I heard every word. He wrapped his arms around them both, pulling his family close, his body shaking with emotions too vast to contain. And in the great hall of Valindra, surrounded by defeated enemies and loyal wolves, the Alpha King finally allowed himself to weep. The trials of House Valanthos lasted 3 days. Lord Aldrich was executed at dawn on the 2nd day, his final moments spent begging for mercy he had never shown to others. The assembled packs watched in silence as justice was served, their eyes cold, and their hearts unmoved by his pleas. Revessa was stripped of her name and her wolf, the most devastating punishment that could befall one of their kind. She was then exiled to the frozen northern wastes, condemned to spend her remaining days as the nothing she had once accused Aelith of being, alone, powerless, forgotten by the world she had tried to conquer. The kingdom began to heal. Wolves who had been forced to serve under Valanthos' occupation came forward to swear renewed loyalty to their true king. The council, purged of traitors, formally annulled the choosing and declared Revessa's brief reign illegitimate. Trade routes reopened. Bonfires of celebration replaced the smoke of war. But it was the quieter moments that mattered most. On the evening of the third day, Aelith sat in the royal nursery with Emrys on her lap. She sang to him as she had before, her voice weaving frequencies that traveled through bone and blood, reaching the places his ears could not. And he responded. Not with the vacant stare of before, not with the reaching toward distant windows, but with smiles, with small sounds that were not quite words but were trying to be, with tiny hands that gripped her fingers and refused to let go. Each night, she sang. Each night, he came a little further back to her. The healers said it was a miracle, that her voice had somehow rewired the pathways in his brain, creating connections that should have been impossible. Aelith knew the truth was simpler than that. Love had reached him where medicine could not. "You are extraordinary," Kale said from the doorway, his amber eyes soft as he watched them. "Both of you." Aelith looked up, her heart full to bursting. "He has been trying to tell us something all along. We're not listening the right way." Kale crossed the room and knelt beside them. Emrys reached for his father immediately, and Kale lifted the boy into his arms with a tenderness that still made Aelith's breath catch. "The bond," Kale said quietly, settling Emrys against his chest. "It needs to be completed. Properly. Before the council, before the kingdom." His eyes found hers. "If you will have me." Aelith thought of everything they had been through, the secrets, the betrayal that was not a betrayal, the months of exile and heartbreak, the battle and the blood and the moment when she had discovered a power she never knew she possessed. And she thought of the future, of raising Emrys together, of watching him grow and learn and speak, of the twins in her belly who would one day call this castle home. "I have always been yours," she said, "from the first night I sang to your son, from the moment you looked at me and saw something worth loving." Kale set Emrys down gently, then took Aelith's hands in his. "Then let us make it official." The ceremony took place at sunset, in the great garden where they had first stolen moments together. The assembled wolves of Valindra watched as their king bared his throat to a woman who had once been a servant, offering himself to her in the ancient gesture of surrender. Aelith pressed her lips to the spot where his neck met his shoulder. Her teeth found the flesh, and she bit down. The bond exploded between them. It was not pain, it was completion. Two souls finally becoming one, every barrier between them dissolving like morning mist. She saw everything. His memories of the night they met, the way his heart had stopped when he first heard her voice drifting from the nursery. His anguish during the choosing, trapped in his own body, screaming silently as his wolf fought to reach her through the fog of poison. His 3 months of desperate searching, of sleepless nights and feral rage, of holding on to sanity by the thinnest of threads, while his kingdom crumbled around him. And he saw her, her fear and grief and anger, her fierce determination to protect the children she carried, her love for Emrys, vast and unconditional, a mother's love even though she had never carried him in her womb. Her love for Kale himself, battered but unbroken, surviving everything that had been done to tear them apart. When they finally separated, both were trembling. "My queen," Kale breathed. "My king," she answered. Around them, wolves lifted their voices in a howl of celebration that shook the stars. 2 months later, on a warm summer evening, Aelith gave birth to twins. A boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gift for song. A girl with amber eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom, and a cry that carried frequencies no newborn should know. Kale held his children with tears streaming down his face, his warrior's hands impossibly gentle as he cradled them against his chest. "Thank you," he whispered to Aelith, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "For fighting for us, for believing in us, for coming back when you had every reason to stay gone." Aelith reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the claiming mark on his throat, the mark that matched the one on her hip, both now healed into beautiful silver scars that proclaimed their bond to all who saw them. "I never stopped believing," she said softly. "Even in the darkest moments, something inside me knew. We were always meant to find our way back to each other." The door creaked open, and a small figure appeared in the doorway. Emrys stood there, his amber eyes wide with wonder, his hand reaching toward the soft sounds of his new siblings. In the 2 months since Aelith's return, his progress had been nothing short of miraculous. He spoke in short sentences now, his voice still rough and uncertain but growing stronger every day. He smiled. He laughed. He played with the other children in the castle, no longer trapped in the prison of silence that had held him for so long. The healers called it impossible. Aelith called it love. "Come meet your brother and sister," she said, patting the bed beside her. The little prince climbed up carefully, settling against her side. He studied the twins with solemn intensity, reaching out to touch the boy's tiny fist, then the girl's downy hair. They stirred at his touch, orienting toward him the way he had once oriented toward Aelith's voice. Then Emrys looked up at her with a question in his eyes. "Sing?" he asked, the word clearer than it had ever been. Aelith's heart overflowed. "Yes, my darling," she said. "I will sing." And as the sun set over Valindra, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Aelith's voice rose in a lullaby that traveled through bone and blood and soul, a song of love and loss and finding, a song of family forged through fire, a song that would echo through the halls of the castle for generations to come. Emrys closed his eyes and smiled, feeling the music in his chest the way he always had, the way he always would. The twins settled into peaceful stillness, already learning to feel what their brother felt. And Kale wrapped his arms around all of them, his mate, his children, his heir, holding tight to the family he had nearly lost. They had found each other against all odds. They had survived betrayal and exile and war, and they would never be parted again. Outside the window, the wolves of Valindra lifted their voices in a chorus that carried across the kingdom. A celebration of their king and queen, a tribute to the bond that could not be broken, a promise that their pack would endure, stronger than ever, for generations to come. And in the royal chambers, surrounded by the family she had fought so hard to protect, Aelith sang on. Her voice carried the frequencies that had first reached a deaf prince in the darkness. Her voice carried the power that had shattered steel and brought enemies to their knees. Her voice carried the love that had survived 3 months of separation and emerged more powerful than ever. And as the last notes faded into the twilight, she knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.